Hallo, Derek hier. Wir hatten gerade unsere letzte Q&A, so Frage-Antwort-Session von unserer Mitgliedschaftsseite und diese Woche waren einige wirklich interessante Fragen. Dieser Ausschnitt für euch für diese Woche, es zeigt ein paar Fragen zum Thema Phrasal Verbs und eine wirklich interessante Präpositionsfrage und wie wir unterschiedlich die digitale und physikalische Welt anders sehen, was Präpositionen angeht. Das ist wirklich eine interessante Frage. Bitte schön. The next questions to do with phrasal verbs. And it says, doesn't really understand the difference between separable and non-separable. So, yeah, I'll try and explain this a bit more detail. So in phrasal verbs, we have two parts. We have the verb and the particle, which is often a preposition, as in take on, take off, and so on. And when we use phrasal verbs, sometimes the verb and the particle go together with nothing in between, and other times we can have something in between. So I'll give you an example of take off. If we use it in the sense of a plane leaving the ground, that's not separable. So the take and the off have to go together in the sentence. So what time does the plane take off? The plane takes off at, okay, there's nothing in between. But if we use take off in the sense of removing clothing, you could say, oh, it's quite warm, I'll take my jumper off, in which case we have my jumper between the take and the off. And this is then separable. And if they have to go together, that is non-separable. I think the confusion comes here is because some of the examples where it was separable, I had them together, and I think this caused confusion. So the thing I would like to add here is that non-separable means they have to go together, and separable means something can go in between, but doesn't have to. So non-separable is a must condition, and separable is a can condition. But even separable could still end up with nothing between them as a sort of coincidence. And the next question on phrasal verbs is the questioner says that one of the examples was written in the past perfect, and what was the reason for this? And the simple answer is no particular reason. There's lots of confusing things about phrasal verbs. The fact that they have so many different meanings and that opposite prepositions don't have opposite meanings when used with phrasal verbs. But one of the good things about them is phrasal verbs are still verbs. So all the things you learned about tenses and aspects and participles and past tense, all that stuff still applies when the verb is being used as a phrasal verb. And so I tried to reflect this in the examples by showing not just present simple or present past, but also other tenses and aspects, in this case, past perfect. So don't be confused by this. Phrasal verbs are verbs. All the tenses and aspects are still applicable. And the last one to do with phrasal verbs, it says, is it right to say when will the plane take off instead of what time does the plane take off? Yeah, I mean, they're sort of semantically equivalent. It's just you might get a different answer. So if you asked what time does the plane take off, you could get an answer as in 3 o'clock, 2:30, a time of day. But if you say when will the plane take off, you could still get 3 o'clock or 2:30, but you might also get an answer in 30 minutes. So although they're semantically the same, the options for answers are different. And the next one is to do with prepositions. And I really like this question. It's a really good one. And it's a question concerning prepositions of place in the digital world. So it's a bit of a long question, so I'll read it out. is often get confused with the usage of preposition in, on, and to for places in the digital world. So when we think of the physical world, we can say, I wrote a sentence on page 11 in my diary, which is true. We think of a sentence in place on the surface of the page, yeah? But in the digital world, there are places like websites, blogs, text box, tweet, post, comment, database, spreadsheet, etc. And the question is not really quite sure which should be used in these cases. And it has a few sort of examples and wants to always use on or some other thing. And there's no sort of vanilla flavor answer to this. So you would use on sort of for pages, as in a surface of a page, that was correct. But often I think I would use in a sort of a digital world, because ultimately at the end of the day, at somewhere there's a file somewhere, a physical file where the data is stored in. The only thing I would say is that if you would post on someone's website or on a web page, but you would write something in a database, you would write something in a text box. You would say, like, I entered the data into the database and the data is now in the database. So generally speaking, in, apart from things like web pages and blogs, when you would use on. Okay, that's a good question. Wenn du das komplette Q&A sehen willst, da ist ein Link in der Beschreibung zu dieser Mitgliedschaftszeit. Es kostet unter 10 € pro Monat und da ist Zugang zu einer Haufen Menge Informationen und Lernmaterial. Ist jeder willkommen. Und da ist ein sehr großzügiger Freund-Verb-Freund-Programm dabei. Das heißt, wenn du nur 3 Leute informierst und die kommen auch rein, dann ich bezahle dir und du hast trotzdem Zugang zu dem kompletten System und sogar gibt's Geld dazu. Bis demnächst. Tschüss.